But when you're about to start speaking, will you just give me a little nod so that I can tell the video guy to start playing, not the slide? Thank you. Hey, how are you? I just saw the news this morning that you asked me to go check to Venezuela.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Karen Sessions. I am the Vice President of Congressional and Public Affairs here at the Millennium Challenge Corporation. We're excited to have you participating in our quarterly town hall. And for those of you here in the room in Washington, D.C. and around the world, we welcome you. As part of MCC's commitment to transparency, we hold these quarterly town halls at a juncture where we can report out some of the news that has come out of our board meeting, and it gives an opportunity to share those updates with you and to hear back from you on your thoughts and comments as well. I'm pleased to have several of my MCC colleagues here today which will participate in the discussion, and online and in the room we encourage you to submit your questions or your remarks, and online there are three ways to do that. We have a tweet using your question, use the hashtag MCC Town Hall, use the handle MCC Gov, or send us an email to events@mcc.gov. So I just wanted to say that again for those of you who are online. And again, you can tweet us your question using the MCC Town Hall, use the handle @mcc.gov, or email at events@mcc.gov. For those in the room, we've handed out note cards so you can write your questions, and we will collect those. Lindsay and Michelle, who are here in the room, can collect those, and we will submit that to our panel here of colleagues. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Chris Dunn, who will talk about the overview of the spring activities, including the board meeting, and then we'll hear from our colleagues that have been involved in the MCC water projects. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Karen. I need to lower some of these devices. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, and thanks for joining us. Again, my name is Chris Dunn. I'm MCC's Acting Chief of Staff. And before I jump into a quick readout of MCC's board meeting, I just wanted to provide a few brief agency updates. First of all, I'm pleased to report that the President's nominee to be MCC CEO, Sean Cairncross, was voted out of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on March 20th and is now pending consideration by the Senate. Our congressional team continues to monitor progress in the Senate. We're hopeful that his full vote will be taken up by the Senate when they return from recess in the coming weeks. Turning to operations, the leadership team continues to advance program development and implementation across the portfolio and also prepare some strategic initiatives for consideration by the CEO and the incoming CEO and his team. Most notably, since the last time we all convened here, I'm pleased to report that MCC's $437 million compact with Niger entered into force at the end of January. As I think many of you know, entry into force is a critical compact milestone that marks the beginning of MCC's 5-year implementation timeframe and is also the point in time when MCC funds are fully obligated. Since the last time we met, our teams have also been hard at work engaging with the new country partners that were selected by the board in December. So that is Timor-Leste for Compact, as well as Lesotho, which was reselected for Compact eligibility after a 2-year hiatus, and as well as new threshold program partner, the Gambia. This included high-level visits to both countries, where I'm happy to report MCC was well received both by government stakeholders and non-governmental stakeholders. We're also really happy to report that since the last time we met, the House actually passed the AGOA and MCA Modernization Act. That was on January 17th. This act would grant MCC the authority to engage in concurrent compacts for the purposes of promoting economic growth and facilitating trade and cross-border investment. So now we're monitoring progress in the Senate, and we're hopeful that the Senate will consider similar legislation, which can then be passed to the President, hopefully for signature. Really looking forward to providing future updates both on the legislation as well as the agency's plans to operationalize that legislation over the coming months. And finally, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the completion of MCC's compact with Indonesia. While closure activities, I think as many of you know, will continue for a number of months, the compact end date was actually on Monday, April 2nd. So we're immensely proud. This is a very large compact, a very big investment for MCC and for the government. We're both quite proud of the accomplishments. And really looking forward to having the opportunity to talk both with you, the board, other stakeholders about what we've accomplished in Indonesia and actually planning some events that would be taking place both in Jakarta and here in Washington over the coming months. So with that, just turning to the board meeting briefly, the board considered 2 items earlier this week on Tuesday at its meeting. One was decisional, one was informational. First, the board approved MCC's new $35 million threshold program with Togo. This is an innovative program that we hope can begin implementation later this year. And the idea is that it will support policy and institutional reforms in 2 areas identified as critical constraints to growth: information and communication technology, as well as land tenure. We think investments in these areas are critical to supporting democracy in Togo, as well as spurring economic growth for the benefit of the people of Togo. This is particularly important in light of recent events in Togo, and the board also directed MCC to continue to closely monitor civil liberties and citizens' rights to freedom of expression in the country as the program moves forward. Second, the board discussed the closeout of MCC's Cabo Verde compact. This is MCC's second compact with Cabo Verde and brings to a close really our 12-year partnership with Cabo Verde. I think the last time we were here, you heard a bit from Robert Blau, our Vice President for Compact Operations, who had participated in some of the closeout ceremonies related to Cabo Verde in November. For those who may not recall, the compact focused really in two critical areas: constraining economic growth, land tenure, and water and sanitation. Not only do we feel that this was MCC's first compact, second compact, and not only that, but I think it's really a great example and exemplifies how MCC is really driving results in country through not just our strict selection criteria, but also our approach to country ownership, sustainability, and policy and institutional reform. The presentation to the board included a review of the compact's accomplishments and early results, as well as an update on the sustainability of MCC investments across both the first and the second compacts. Conveniently, Cabo Verde is also a nice segue to our next panel here. Having just celebrated World Water Day on March 22nd, we thought we would use some of our time today to talk about MCC's work in the water sector, including the second compact in Cabo Verde. So with that, I'll just invite my colleagues to come up to the table. So joining us today, we have Autumn Lynch, who's a program officer for our compact in Zambia. We have Jennifer Niedinger, who is a program officer for MCC's Sierra Leone Threshold program. We also have Omar Hopkins, who is our resident country director in Cabo Verde. And last, but certainly not least, Kate Pritchard from our Congressional Public Affairs Department, who's going to moderate the panel and discussion. So with that, let me hand it off to Kate, and thanks very much.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, panel. My name is Kate Pritchard. I am an international communications specialist here at Millennium Challenge Corporation. So I want to thank you all for being here with us, and thank you also to the panel. As Chris mentioned, we did just celebrate World Water Day just last month. And as part of MCC's commitment to reducing poverty worldwide, we've actually invested $2.2 billion in clean water, sanitation, and natural resource improvement projects in partner countries across Asia, Africa, Europe, and Latin America since 2004. So my colleagues today represent just a few of the projects that are currently in development and actually one that was recently closed, as Chris mentioned. So I'm just going to turn to them and ask them to give us a little bit of a background about the projects and the compact's work in the water sector. So if you don't mind, Autumn, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Kate. I'm delighted to be here today to talk about the Zambia Compact. Can you all hear me? So the $355 million Zambia Compact is a single-sector compact with investments solely in the water and sanitation sector. We're currently in the final year of implementation. As you all know, our compacts run for 5 years, and so this compact will be closing this coming November. The compact aims to boost economic growth by improving the water supply, sanitation, and drainage infrastructure in Lusaka, which is Zambia's capital. And in the long term, the compact's outcomes are fourfold. First, decreasing the incidence of water-related disease. Second, decreasing productive days lost due to disease and the time required to collect water. Third, reducing business and residential flood losses. And finally, improving the financial sustainability of Lusaka's water utility. And so to achieve this goal and these outcomes, the compact is composed of two core activities. First, infrastructure, and second, institutional strengthening. We're working with two implementing entities, the water utility in Lusaka, as well as Lusaka City Council, which is the government entity responsible for maintaining drains. And so to give you a little bit of examples of what we're doing on the ground, one, we're rehabilitating and expanding Lusaka's water supply network, and that includes the reduction of water loss from leaks, theft, and metering problems. Many of you may know that as non-revenue water. We're improving drainage infrastructure, we're rehabilitating and expanding sewer networks, we're supporting better asset and environmental management of the water utility, and we're promoting gender-inclusive policymaking and planning. If you travel to Lusaka today, you'll see along the sides of the roads immense work being done to lay these pipes and improve the network. I recently was there in November of last year, and it's quite impressive to see the visual impact. And to close about the compact, we do have a small grant component called the Innovation Grants Program. It invites community-based organizations, civil society, and private sector entities to come up with innovative ideas to invest in the water, sanitation, and drainage sectors in Lusaka. Some of the things the grantees have been able to do are install biolatrines at schools. Second, to work with the solid waste management issues within Lusaka and setting up the first formal recycling program. Also improving water supply in a community in Lusaka called Jack Compound. So in sum, regarding the Zambia Compact, through all of these investments, we expect that we will reach 1.2 million beneficiaries. We're excited to celebrate these successes over the course of the next year as we near closeout in November. Thank you.
And Jenny, can you give us a little bit of info on Sierra Leone, please?
Yes, I'm Jenny Niedinger. I'm the policy officer for the Sierra Leone Threshold Program. The threshold programs are smaller than the compacts. They're typically under $50 million, so the Sierra Leone Threshold Program is $44 million. And we're not really focused on infrastructure like compacts are, although we do have a small works project on this one. We're working in two sectors in Sierra Leone, in water and energy. And overall, the idea behind this program is to strengthen the regulation of these two sectors. We have the water and the energy sectors, and they're both under the one regulatory commission. And so it's a lot of policy reform, institutional strengthening, capacity development. Those are the main focus of a threshold program over a compact. And so in the water sector specifically, I'll highlight a few activities. The first one I find really exciting, it's a mapping exercise. And so the water distribution system in Freetown has not actually been mapped since the late 60s, early 70s. So what we did was we took those maps, we put them onto tablets, and then we have people walking around Freetown, following the mains and actually confirming the positions of these mains. It's pretty exciting. And then that's where they're able to identify the critical risk areas. And then that's going to be followed by a conditions assessment, so an inspection of the actual infrastructure and what needs to be fixed. And that includes these informal connections, which if you've been to Freetown, there are these blue spaghetti lines just all over. These are typically illegally tapped into the main lines. And then this will lead to a hydraulic model, which the utility can use for all of its planning purposes. The second activity I'd highlight is a district metering area, a DMA. So what we're going to do is select a DMA, which in itself is an exercise, and then seal it off. So we are able to accurately measure the water going into this DMA, and then we can calculate non-revenue water. And then within this area, the Guma Valley Water Company, the utility, will be able to implement and test these different practices around billing, fixing some of the pipes, and then they're going to be able to figure out what works best so that they would be able to roll it out. They have over 40 actual districts, so we're just targeting the one for now. We're also going to pilot a public-private partnership model for the kiosks. We're going to take standpipes that are not functioning and turn them into kiosks. And then the engage private sector, we're going to help figure out a model to do the O&M for these kiosks. And then finally, underpinning all of this is a large institutional strengthening contract. Through this learning by doing approach, these contractors are sitting at the utility. They're doing the day-to-day functions with the utility staff. They'll be creating things like a performance improvement plan, a tariff setting methodology, and even smaller things like helping them figure out their chart of accounts and putting in 3 years of actual expenses.
Thank you. I realize I should turn the microphone on to be heard. Last but certainly not least, Omar Hopkins, if you could give us a little bit of info on the Cabo Verde Compact, which, as Chris noted, closed just last fall. It's a $66 million compact. It was our second compact. And if you could just give us a little bit of
Sure.
info on that.
Good morning, everyone. In describing the Cape Verde Compact, I think it's worth just spending a few minutes to go back to and understand what the situation was when we first started engaging with the Cabo Verdeans in 2010 and 2011 in the water sector. So at that time, the water sector was characterized by, at the national level, multiple actors having various responsibilities in terms of overseeing the water supply and sanitation sector generally. And as you might imagine, when there are multiple actors engaged, there were areas of conflict, so areas where two agencies had dominion over a certain thematic area, and gaps. And so that led to a lot of kind of overall strategic confusion within the sector. As you drill down and looked at the utilities, the water service providers themselves, these were essentially municipal departments providing water services, and as is typically the case in those circumstances, these tended to be overstaffed and underperforming, kind of with low quality of service characteristics. And in general, we could observe when we were traveling the country and talking to our counterparts that the planning for new projects was relatively weak. So that's kind of setting the stage. In our dialogue with our counterparts, we were able to kind of engage with them and help them develop a clear vision of where they wanted to take the water sector. It helps to also know that at that time, Cape Verde had just graduated from a low-income country to a lower middle-income country, which had some kind of financial implications of the types of assistance that they were likely to get from various development partners, mostly going from grants to loans, and so things were more costly. So we with the Cape Verdeans, we helped them establish a vision for where they wanted to go, which was really a more sustainable sector that was kind of less dependent on kind of government subsidies and support. And so we developed essentially a three-legged project to help them achieve that kind of overall objective of increasing service quality generally, expanding service, and reducing its dependence on government inputs. So the first level was to create to do national level policy and institutional reform. Cape Verde is one of the most water scarce countries in the world, and it was decided that in order to really manage effectively that scarce resource, they needed one agency kind of responsible from source to sink to manage the water supply within the country. So with them, we established the creation of ANAS, which is the National Agency for Water Supply and Sanitation, and it implemented a number of key regulatory and institutional reforms. So a new national water code was passed, which is kind of the framework water law under which other acts can be promulgated. So water efficiency, water quality codes, and so on and so forth are now kind of all come in under that framework law, and we supported a number of those types of initiatives. The second key leg was looking at the utility, at the water service provision itself, so the water companies. So in this, we were fortunate that Cape Verdeans already had a good example of a model that they liked, which was what they called a multiple municipal model. The United States would call this kind of a regionalization effort of taking several small utilities and merging them to get to the scale and efficiency that will promote better service provision and ultimately more cost effective. So we created a new company, Aguas de Santiago, on the main island of Santiago, so that serves about half of the total population. We took 9 smaller municipal water departments and merged them together into a single corporate entity. We did a tariff study, proposed new tariffs, looked at kind of critical infrastructure requirements, kind of planning for that utility to be able, in order to enable them to improve their level of service that they're providing their customers. And then the third leg of the compact was what we call the infrastructure grant facility. So we set aside approximately $20 million to do relatively small, in MCC context, relatively small infrastructure projects, really aimed at supporting utilities to improve their level of service. So these are projects like relining a transmission line to reduce physical losses, extending the network into neighborhoods that were previously unserved. We did a wastewater treatment plant rehabilitation. So a number of relatively small, discrete activities. I think the key benefit of the infrastructure grant facility was whereas when we arrived, there was a relatively kind of poor planning project pipeline, the creation of the facility really incentivized utilities to think about what is their pipeline and what is their priority of projects that need to go forward. And so I think that has had a transformational effect within the sector. I would say the other outcome that was kind of, what we aspired to but didn't quite dare say at the beginning of the project was that this facility, it was originally a grant facility, so simply kind of on granting MCC funds. But at the end, over the course of the last 12 to 18 months, we were able to have a dialogue with our Cape Verdean partners, with the U.S. EPA and other members of the United States water sector to transform that grant-making facility into a revolving fund, which is kind of where we left it. So that's really, I think, another kind of transformational change that will really kind of reorient the mindset within the sector in Cape Verde and lead to this long-term sustainability. And I would just want to end, although we put in a lot of work on our side, the real credit for this transformation really belongs with the government of Cape Verde and our MCA counterparts, who just consistently over 5 years, through thick and thin, through very difficult times, very difficult political decisions. There were staff who had to be let go. So very difficult kind of political decisions. They really stuck through this, and they had the vision and the clarity of vision, and they kind of kept at it doggedly. And they really just deserve a tremendous credit for their hard work.
Thank you, Omar, and congratulations again to you and the whole team. So just a couple of questions and maybe I'll start with the first one to Autumn and to Jenny, kind of where the projects are right now. Where do you see the greatest opportunities, whether it's in the Compaq in Zambia or the Threshold in Sierra Leone, but where do you see the greatest opportunity, whether it's in terms of impact or opportunity for sustainability as the projects continue to move forward?
You all may know that MCC is founded on the principle of country ownership, and like Omar was just saying, we've been really fortunate in Zambia to have a strong partnership with the government of Zambia. It's created a lot of opportunities in Zambia, including through the master investment plans in the water supply and sanitation sectors. So to back up a little bit, what are these master plans? Early on in Compaq development in Zambia, the government, through MCC funding, was able to create these plans which outline projects and specific funding needs to improve infrastructure in Lusaka over a 25-year horizon. And so this provided a big picture roadmap for the government and for the water utility, and they were able to use the master plans to prioritize where, one, the Compaq could invest, and then two, for them to further engage with other partners in the donor community to invest in the remaining projects and the remaining funding needs. And so through this, the government was able to leverage hundreds of millions of dollars. And just one example is the Lusaka Sanitation program, which is an over $300 million project funded through 4 donors, including the African Development Bank and the World Bank, and they're prioritizing investments in the sanitation services in Lusaka. We've been really pleased to see how the government's prioritization of the master plans has been able to create complementary projects and also long-term impact in the sector.
In Sierra Leone, I'd say, I was trying to think of this question in the light of if I was a Guma Valley employee. I'd say the 2 buckets of opportunity I see for this program, one is just the functionality of the outputs. I mean, how do you manage a water system if you don't know what it looks like, if you're not able to consult maps or a hydraulic model? So I think a lot of the outputs that this program will lead to will allow people to be doing their job better. I feel like if I were there right now, I would be going in every day just putting out fires. But now if you have these maps, you have some plans, you know where the critical risks are, you can actually plan in the near future, in the long term, what are you going to do with your system and how are you going to make it better? The other thing I would say would be really just the workforce I would imagine they'd be more fulfilled, more happy, and they have the resources to do their job. I'd say if I was an employee there, to be able to go in and know some more information about the system and how to fix it and where the priorities are. You have people who don't want to pay for the service because it's not that great, and then the utility doesn't have the money to improve it. So maybe if we are able to make an impact somewhere in that cycle, we can have people who are a bit more excited to go to work, to service the customers, and to just make it a better service for the people who are in need of water in Freetown.
Great, thank you. And so maybe taking it from the open projects to the closed project, but thinking about Cabo Verde, the opportunities, but really what are the lessons learned, I think, as we continue to engage in the water sector?
Yeah, so good question. So I think in terms of kind of the key lessons learned in Cape Verde, so first is it's the kind of the partnership that we have with our counterparts, the government and our MCA staff. I think in Cape Verde we were very lucky that the government had kind of a strong clarity of vision about what they wanted from the compact in general and from the water sector project in particular. And I think that clarity of vision kind of really helped us through the very challenging portions, of which there were a number. So I think that's the kind of the first key lesson. The second key lesson is institutional change is really difficult, right? Really, really hard. But we can do it, right? We, right, along with our partners, if there is real political will, it's possible. Again, I think the other advantage that we had in Cape Verde, we were there, I think, through 3 election cycles for the most recent compact. So, like anywhere else, right? Once you have elections, kind of everything kind of grinds to a halt. But even in the context of where there was elections and there were, political parties kind of fiercely vying for votes, there was kind of a broad-based consensus that this was a key issue and that it needed to move forward. And I think that really kind of helped insulate the project from kind of some of these political cycles. And then I think the kind of the third key lesson is around the use of these infrastructure facilities and perhaps evolving them to revolving loan funds. I think this is it's a great tool and an opportunity. I think it's something that we need to learn more about how to use it effectively and kind of the limits and constraints under which we can use those tools. But I think it's in Cape Verde, it turned out to be a kind of a great tool for really kind of moving the sector from essentially a reactive position to kind of being enabling and empowering kind of the actors in the sector to be much more proactive and identifying their needs and requirements and really working to kind of better serve their customers.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you all very much for sharing your experiences. I want to actually invite Chris to come back up and we'll go to our Q&A session.
Great, thanks, Kate, and thanks again to Omar, Autumn, and Jenny for their time and actually the continued time you will give us as you stay up and help answer questions. As Kate mentioned, MCC has spent over $2.2 billion in water, sanitation, and natural resource management projects. So it's kind of always a great opportunity to take a pause and actually reflect both on what we've sort of finished in some of our programs and some of our programs that are ongoing and current. So with that, we're going to really open it up for questions now. We've got a few questions we received in advance that I think we'll start with. But please use this opportunity to jump in, join the conversation. You can post your question to Twitter, or you can email to events@mcc.gov. And for folks in the room, I think you all have index cards. You can jot down a question and hand it to some of my colleagues, and they'll bring them up to the front. So again, I was going to start with just a few questions we had in advance. Maybe first, Autumn, can you talk a little bit about the challenges on working on large-scale infrastructure in an urban environment like Lusaka?
Sure. So as I mentioned previously, the Zambia Compact has an infrastructure component. 80% of the Compact funds are for the infrastructure. And so this is improving the sanitation and water supply network in Lusaka. And that means going into urban communities. That means laying pipes, digging trenches, closing roads, increased traffic. You have trucks going through these communities now. The roads are narrow. The roads might not be originally built to have this heavy traffic coming through, and our projects are increasing that. And so we recognize through all of this that you have to be really mindful of the community that you're working in, not only for their health and safety, but also for their buy-in and support of the projects. One way that we've mitigated this is through an information, education, and communication component, or IEC. And that component of the compact is working with communities to help them understand about their safety among these infrastructure projects. So for one example, we have some drains that are being installed in the communities, and teaching these communities that they aren't for swimming, that they can get dangerous during rainy season, and also that they're not supposed to be used for trash disposal, which can result in a damaged drain later down the road. So it's been really important to recognize the IEC component while we're working in these urban environments and what you can do.
Great, thanks, Autumn. Maybe just moving to your left, Omar, I think we both mentioned kind of MCC's 12-year partnership with Cabo Verde, that longer investment and timeline. But can you tell us a little bit about that longer trajectory, kind of the first Compaq investments and maybe the health of the partnership over that time?
Sure. So I think Cape Verde was MCC's, maybe not the first, but the second compact that we signed back in 2004 or 5, a long time ago. So the initial compact focused on improving the port infrastructure in Praia, increasing the quality of roads, and some agricultural projects. In addition to the second compact, which again focused on land titling reform and the wash sector. I'll just kind of give some snippets to kind of give you a sense of the nature of our relationship. When the first compact was signed, it was signed at a time when the value of the dollar was quite high, and then during the course of implementation, the dollar really declined in value, particularly relative to the euro. So there were some very tough decisions that needed to be made about what could and could not be funded within the available budget envelope of the compact. In the port, there was quite a bit that was originally envisioned in the master plan that had to be kind of scaled back due to the available funds. The government themselves really stood up and put forward tens of millions of dollars, right, to complete the extra work, which is, to me is a real demonstration of their commitment and seriousness about taking charge of their own development, right? This is not something that they were just kind of accepting. This was something that was really part of their vision and plan. Another example from the first compact were the roads. So when MCC came in, we have our own responsibility to design roads with certain, safety standards and design characteristics that make them safe to travel and safe for vehicle traffic and pedestrians. I think the government of Cape Verde has essentially accepted those kind of international best practices for design standards on all their future road projects. Right. So these are I think indications of how serious the relationship and strong the relationship has been between Cape Verde and the United States government. In addition to the second compact, again. I was an acting RCD there for the last few months, and one of my observations was senior level government officials always made time, right, for MCC when we had an issue to bring to the table. They always made time. Almost immediately, when we asked for a meeting, right, a meeting would be scheduled. So they took that relationship very seriously, which I think greatly facilitated the efficient and effective execution of the projects, and I think that's really demonstrated in both the first and the second compact.
Thanks. And Jenny, maybe can you tell us just a little bit more about some of the maybe other projects in the Threshold program? You mentioned the energy sector.
Sure. So in Sierra Leone, we have 3 projects. We have the water project, the electricity project, and the regulatory strengthening project. So in the energy project, back in 2014, the government did a restructuring of that sector. It started with the unbundling of the National Power Authority and also the creation of the Regulatory Commission, which oversees water and electricity. So in the energy side, we're supporting the policy. Again, Threshold is less focused on infrastructure, more on the policy and institutional strengthening. And so we're helping them with their government policy to figure out how the utility can become more self-sufficient. We want a continued role of government, but how do you make it so that it's a diminishing financing role? Some of the outputs from that project would be a sector roadmap, a strategic business plan, a consumer census for the distribution and supply authority. And then we also have the regulatory strengthening project, which is also a strong TA project. So we have consultants who are helping the Regulatory Commission, which is very small right now. I believe it has about 7 staff, figuring out all of their plans, from recruitment plans to licensing procedures to their tariff methodology. And then we'll also be doing a small activity around results-based financing, where the idea is we've injected a lot of TA into these utilities and to the commission. How do you then sort of show that it has worked? And so we'll have these conditional, predefined KPIs that these utilities will be working towards at the latter half of the program, and then we can pay out against the ones that they've met.
Thanks. So we've got quite a few questions coming in. One relates to water sanitation, where I think our panelists might be helpful, so I may take that one first. But there was a question on how MCC coordinates WASH programming with other donors, and I think I would just say as a threshold matter, no pun intended, MCC and our counterparts we spend considerable time working with the other donors in any sector that we're working in, WASH, energy, roads, agriculture, whatever it is, both on the ground and to the extent we can here back in Washington and headquarters, to make sure that coordination is kind of maximizing impact and scale and investments. But maybe starting down the other end with Omar, we can get a flavor for how that maybe has played out in some of these countries.
Sure. So, usually when the MCC starts its engagement with a country, we're not the first donor to show up, and we won't be the last donor to leave, right? So there's a continuum of effort, and we really need to figure out what's the value that we add within the donor landscape as it exists. So I'll just talk about Cape Verde. In Cape Verde, we came in, the French and the Japanese, and most particularly the Luxembourg Development Corporation had a strong footprint in the water sector in Cape Verde. And we really relied a lot on their kind of experience and insights as to the challenges that they faced and areas where they had not had success but wished that they had success, and took their advice as to what they thought would work and would not work in the design of our program, and used a lot of their material kind of as points of discussion with the government. As we left Cape Verde, right, we're not the last donor in the WASH sector to leave. We have really engaged very heavily with the other development partners, but mostly what we hope we have done is we hope that we have left the government in a kind of much better position to be able to articulate its requirements, right, to these other donors, so that the government themselves can be more effective at kind of organizing these resources, right, to meet their ultimate objectives. And I think that's the kind of case in Cape Verde, and I think that's generally the case of how we operate more broadly in the water space.
I guess I'll just piggyback on that, is that we do in Zambia, we work very closely with the donor community. There are weekly coordination meetings that we are a part of. And just one example of how working with the donor community can really leverage the work that you're doing on the ground, especially given that our Zambia Compact will be closing in November. If there are any unfinished works or unfinished initiatives, is there funding within the donor community to help pick up those projects? And so in Zambia, early on in the compact, we saw that solid waste management was something that was really needed within Lusaka. And so at present, the government has taken ownership and an initiative, and they're in the process of standing up a solid waste management utility or unit. And it's under Parliament, under consideration right now. We're hopeful that it'll work its way through in the coming months. But it'll also have a financial impact, and they'll need to determine how to fund that. And so we've been discussing with the donor community how they can be supportive, and that there will be this need with the government. If the government can't fund it themselves, will the donors be able to help support? So we're hopeful, and we're excited to see where it might go.
In Sierra Leone, we do the similar stakeholder workshops. We have steering committees. We involve the donors. I won't repeat everything they've said. I'd give one example. In Sierra Leone, I know that there is one rather large donor who's they had their project ongoing, and then they have actually decided to wait until they get some of the information from our project, from the maps, to continue and to fulfill their program goals, because they think that this would be so much benefit to their project to get the maps. The other thing I'd just highlight is the way that MCC works is that when you have when we have our local staff. So in Sierra Leone, it's much smaller because it's a threshold program. It's about 15 people. On Compaq's, I think it's closer to 50 or more. That's the implementation unit of this program, and they're the ones who are overseeing the implementation of the contractors. So I think one of the big benefits of that is that you do have a local workforce who knows the program in and out. They're the ones who are actually implementing it, and they are obviously staying there once the program is over. And so whether it's working with DFID or with UNICEF on water projects in Sierra Leone, there's still going to be a staff who knows the MCC project in and out because they were the ones doing it.
I think, Omer, there was one question maybe specific.
Sure. So I'll just read the question and I'll answer it. So what are the major achievements of the compacts in Cape Verde in terms of water loss, NRW, cost recovery, and other indicators? That's a great question. So the program logic in Cape Verde was built around this notion that the existing universe of water service providers, right, as we saw them in 2010, 2011, right, was not sustainable, right? That in fact, whatever books there were, and there weren't many books, right, showed that there was, there was a gap between the amount of revenue that was being collected and the amount of resources that needed to be expended, just in terms of maintenance, never mind renewal and expansion and all the other things, right? So we developed we didn't develop it, we kind of borrowed it from the World Bank, but the World Bank has a paper that looks at, how to quantify what these hidden costs are. And so that model is really based on three kind of key principles. So first is non-revenue water, right? How much water is kind of leaking out of the system. The second is how effective are you, once you issue the bill, at actually collecting the money, right? And then the third piece is, are the tariffs set in a way that you will actually recover your costs, right? So that's kind of a very kind of abbreviated nutshell of that model, but that's kind of the core of it. And so, part of the development objectives of the project as a whole, right, was to say, right, if you, the government, are serious about, right, kind of weaning the sector off, it would never be 100% because it never is 100% anywhere, but reducing the kind of reliance on government for inputs, right, then you need to have a tool, right, that clearly explains to you kind of, are you making progress, right, against that? And so this is the tool that we established. And so actually the national agency, right, on us, it uses this tool to kind of monitor the performance of various utilities and districts within the country. Have we seen kind of water loss? So I think kind of, project by project, we have seen water loss reductions, where we've like relined a leaky distribution line or something like that. But I think it's still kind of early days. This is one of kind of our great questions is, how fast can you move the needle on these things, right? It takes a certain amount of time. But again, the fact that when we came, most of the utilities did not have like a set of books that you could use to kind of make an assessment. So we're just trying to move them to, right, it's at least the financing is kind of reasonably clear. And then, the long-term objective kind of, after we're gone is, right, if utilities can get to this point, right, where their kind of their books are relatively, readable and cogent and understandable kind of what their financial situation is, they themselves will be in a much better position to go to a revolving fund and get a kind of a blended finance, or get financing on, from blended sources, some government, some kind of just much like a revolving fund here in the United States. That's the kind of the aspirational trajectory that we're trying to put them on. Sorry, it's a long-winded kind of answer to the question, but that's kind of generally the philosophy of where we're trying to go. And again, kind of discrete projects I think have made difference. The systemic impact probably take a little longer to measure. We've only kind of really just closed out the project.
Thanks. Well, we'll actually come back a little bit to some questions about infrastructure funding, but I wanted to pivot for a second for a couple questions for Kate. One was a specific question just about whether there's someone had heard something about an upcoming investment opportunities review in Ghana. Can you provide some info on that for the audience?
Sure, absolutely. There is an upcoming webinar about opportunities in Ghana. So actually next Friday, April 13th, MCC will be hosting a webinar about upcoming procurement opportunities in Ghana. And this is in support of our power sector compact that's underway there. So if you're interested, please check out on our website under the events section. There's more information on that webinar there. And then I would just say more broadly, if you're interested in procurement and partnership opportunities, on our website we also have a great resource in the Work With Us page, and you can find a lot of great information there, including a 12-month business forecast that'll give you some idea of what's upcoming, both in partnerships and opportunities within our countries and across countries. So lots of great information.
Great. That was actually the second question as well. So, the Work With Us page is a huge resource for anybody trying to find out more about how they can partner with us or our partners in country, which are obviously in the driver's seat of implementing and administering many of these grants, contracts, and other things. There was one question that I think we probably get every quarter, and it's a great question to make sure we always clarify is, when will MCC select more countries to partner with? I'll just take that one, but I think, as many of you know, MCC's board makes selection decisions typically once a year at the December board meeting. This follows the publication of the MCC scorecard, which typically is made public in November. And just as a reminder, MCC is selecting countries and statutorily is limited to working with countries that are low-income countries or lower middle-income countries. And then from there, we look at which of them pass our scorecard and then which of the ones our board will select for potential compact partnerships, and then similarly for threshold partnerships. In addition, there was a question here just about how MCC is addressing the gap in infrastructure funding, and I think a related question on how we make decisions about what are the right infrastructure investments to make. Maybe I'll just take a general response, and then maybe some of the panelists may have some comments to make. But as a flexible tool, just in general, as we look at any financing gaps in the countries we work in and the sectors we're working in, we are, I think, constantly, both in our donor coordination efforts and in our engagement with the private sector, looking to leverage other resources to crowd in investment, whether that be through blended finance opportunities, public-private partnerships, revolving funds that enable sort of the institutional change we make to result in more infrastructure investments. But we are constantly looking within our Compaq investments for those types of opportunities. I think our investment in Jordan is a great example where we were able to have a relatively, it was a modest compact investment that was able to leverage and make possible through viability gap financing a large BOT public-private partnership for the operation and maintenance of the El Samra wastewater treatment plant, which is, I think, the most modern, sophisticated, really, plant in the region. And there are examples of like that in different forms that are sort of across our portfolio. I don't know, in that spirit, Omar, I don't know if there's anything to say on that in the context of this infrastructure financing fund and the revolving fund that may continue.
Yeah, so I think we're always cognizant of the fact of these are U.S. government grant dollars, and that we want to use them in a way that is responsible both to our mission and to our taxpayers, and that means not displacing, not undertaking projects that would otherwise be viable through other means, right? Or how can we use our scarce resources, and any of these countries that we go to, even though we're making very large grants, right, we're kind of really, at some level, we're only scratching the surface of the solution, right? So, how can we be very strategic about using our grant funds to really kind of maximize the impact? I think that's always, particularly as we're in the design phase of Compaq, this is kind of front and center in our minds all the time.
There was a question here about the SGDs and also, again, this question on how we make decisions about what investments MCC might make through a compact, and I think they are somewhat related. The question specifically on the SGDs is how do SDGs 1 and 6, no poverty and clean water and sanitation, impacting MCC project planning and implementation, as well as collaboration with potential partners? Again, I'm happy to start off and then open the floor a bit, but we certainly recognize the SGDs are the culmination of many, many years of collaboration and input from donors, country partners, MCC itself, and they set forth these ambitious goals for sustainable global development through 2030. From our perspective, MCC's emphasis on inclusive economic growth, evidence-based decision-making, selectivity, and transparency, we think help drive the achievement of many of these 17 SGDs. Again, though, our specific programming in country is based on a demand-driven model that assesses the most binding constraints to growth in that particular country. What can MCC do with these precious taxpayer dollars to have the most impact to relieve and catalyze economic growth in the country. And so we do not necessarily use the SGDs for planning purposes. We use this economic constraints analysis tool and then the root cause analysis and diagnostics that help us point to what the most important problems we think there are for us to tackle in a particular sector. But we certainly think that our investments are contributing to the achievement in the SGDs in an overall sense. I don't know if anyone has anything else to... Okay. There was also a question here about a recent blog post on MCC's website about analysis done on our investments in the road sector, and I think a question about how MCC or does MCC evaluate all of its investments. The short answer is yes. MCC conducts independent evaluations of all our investments, and with that's to help us ensure that we have accountability and that we are looking and learning lessons from our own investments so that we can maximize our investments and our results in the future. We think that's just an important part of how we can both contribute to our own learning, but to the broader development community. So I've got, great. There's actually one more here specifically for Jenny as well, and I'm, in a former life, I was the country team lead for Sierra Leone as well, so I'm happy to help out and chime in on this question. But what challenges do you see for the sustainability of the Sierra Leone Threshold Program, given that threshold programs are small? And kind of how was the thinking different in developing the threshold program from it might have been in a compact?
Sure, I'll start, and then since you were the one who actually developed it, I'll let you go. I would say, thresholds are smaller. They're $40 to $50 million, or this one's 44. And then, like I said, the focus is not on infrastructure. It is on policy reform, institutional strengthening, which is a great place to start, but is also, it lends itself to trickiness in terms of measuring achievements. I think some of the challenges I would say that the challenges of sustainability would be, we can create beautiful plans. We can have consultants come in and do assessment reports. We've all read 1,000 of those. How do you make sure that they actually implement them, and how do you make sure they have the budget to actually implement them? These are utilities. They should be performing well enough that they can sustain themselves. But it's going to be it's a long road from making these pretty plans to actually implementing them, which is why I do think that the Threshold Program has been successful in really taking into account what the current state is and helping figure out and documenting that state, and then also trying to push past that and figure out how to implement, like how to get a tariff methodology in place, and really doing the learning by doing and getting everybody in the utilities to be hands-on in implementing these projects. In terms of longer sustainability, I'll hand it over to Chris.
I can just echo what Jenny was saying, and I think during the development of the Sierra Leone Threshold Program, we were very much looking at Cabo Verde and thinking about the approach that the Cabo Verde Compact was taking to approaching institutional and policy reform. On the one hand, I think that gets to the heart of how you sustain utility improvement and service improvement in the water and electricity in Sierra Leone, tackling these utilities to make sure that they are providing services better, they have a better understanding of their systems, and they have the tools and the know-how to tackle seemingly intractable problems like illegal connections, non-revenue water, all of these things. But equally, it's quite difficult at the end of a program like that to say, okay, so how do we know that, yes, we've maybe achieved some benchmarks in this program, but how do we know those will be sustained in the long run? And we thought about that a lot during the design of the program. And in fact, the results-based financing activity that I think is hopefully just getting underway, there's actually an announcement for looking for partnerships for that activity on MCC's website right now, was really designed with that thought in mind. It was, how do we know that the technical assistance inputs that are being put into the utilities are leaving this lasting change? And one thought with that was to kind of pull back some of that technical assistance and see if the utilities can perform on their own and hit key performance indicators that could be established and then be associated with these results or outcome-based finance triggers. So, that is just getting underway, but it was not just MCC's concern, but I know for our partners in Sierra Leone, it was very much a part of what they were thinking about. They've seen many consultants over the years come and go and had a real concern with how are they going to know that these investment dollars lead to sustainable change in utility performance.
I'll just echo the call for proposals has gone out. I believe it's due April 11th. It's on our website, and it's on the MCCU, the local unit. It's on their website. It is a call for proposals. It's a partnership opportunity for to partner with the MCCU, the local group, to figure out the results-based financing activity, help figure out the KPIs, help figure out how you pay out against those KPIs. And so it would be a partnership directly with them, with support, obviously, and oversight from MCC. So if you're interested in that, or you know of any of your any organizations interested in doing that, helping design this actual activity, that would it's open right now.
Great, and I can see Omar.
So just to kind of step back a little bit, contextualize it a little bit beyond the Sierra Leone case. I think we haven't mentioned it so far, and it would be remiss if we didn't mention it now. But sustainability, right, has a lot of different dimensions to it. One important dimension is to really make sure that the customers, right, are getting the service that they want and are willing to pay for. And in achieving that, I think we need to look very carefully at, right, who's not receiving service. And a lot of times those are, right, the poor and otherwise disenfranchised or disadvantaged households, often female-headed households and so on and so forth. So there is kind of across the portfolio, there's a strong effort and emphasis on understanding, right, those types of consumers and how our programs really impact those, and what can we practically do kind of within the programmatic space in which we're working, right, to make sure that we're addressing their needs clearly, and that's a kind of an important element of sustainability and in general satisfaction with the services being provided by our partners.
There were two more questions. I know we're short on time, but we'll try to get to them quickly. One I think is a quick answer, but there was a question about the status of MCC's potential Compaq partnership with Tunisia. Just a reminder that Tunisia was selected as Compaq eligible by the board in December of 2016. At this point, the constraints analysis for Tunisia has been completed, and our teams, both at MCC and the Tunisian government's team, are working towards defining projects for consideration by MCC that would form the basis of that potential investment in the Tunisia Compact. The other question, and again, I'll probably throw it back to the panel, although I do want to flag we're just a bit over time, but there was a question about what MCC is doing in terms of gender and social inclusion in the water sector, and maybe among projects in general. But I know maybe start with Omar, because in Cabo Verde, I know we've just concluded, and there might be more to.
Yeah. So I mean, I would say in Cape Verde, in the design, implementation, and evaluation, we made a very conscious decision that gender would not be something that kind of sat on the outside of the other parts of the reform project. That gender and these social dimensions, right, really needed to be front and center. It needed to be part of the strategic vision of what the country wanted to achieve in water, and then it needed to be kind of very much embedded in all the kind of downstream consequences of the actions and steps that we were taking to help move towards achieving that vision. So it was really woven in throughout. I will just kind of give kind of a very simple kind of pragmatic reason why it's worth doing it. There are all sorts of good reasons for doing it, but we, as part of the infrastructure grant facility, we funded a number of kind of household connections. And when we were going through some very difficult periods with some very difficult decisions around kind of difficult policy and kind of retrenchment related issues, right, the fact that we had a fund that was really dedicated towards helping kind of visibly the poorest, most disadvantaged members of the Cape Verdean society was a kind of a drip, drip, drip of good news that was really kind of part and parcel of getting through some of those difficult spots. So gender is really kind of a critical issue. It needs to be addressed kind of systematically and kind of very tightly woven within the projects.
And I know we're over time, but I don't know if there are any quick examples from Zambia and Sierra Leone that you want to share.
Just really quick, in Zambia, there's been a great success in terms of having women be a part of the construction work on our infrastructure projects, and so our infrastructure and gender colleagues were able to, with our government counterparts, build into the contracts build into the infrastructure contracts to have women as a participate in or be employees to build these infrastructure projects. Sorry, I didn't explain that very well. as an outcome, we've seen over 20% women participation in the contracts that have been implemented in the Zambia Compact. And it's above the U.S. average.
Historically, it's 3% in Zambia.
Yeah, historically, it's 3% in Zambia. So.
All right. So thanks. I think that not only is that all the questions, that is literally all the time. We are 2 minutes over, 3 minutes over. Again, thanks to everyone who's joining us here in person and online. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. Obviously, we look forward to doing this again after our next board meeting and on a quarterly basis. As I think we've said a few times, please stay connected, visit our website, check out the Work With Us page, attend our events. We really do benefit from both sort of talking about our work, but hearing from you and having the opportunity to engage with our stakeholders in the NGO community, the government, the USG community, and the private sector. So with that, thank you again. Have a great weekend, and looking forward to seeing you all again soon.